morning, Betty.
Good morning, Tracy. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, and thank you so much for allowing me to interview you today regarding your involvement in the Contra Costa County Historical Society and the History Center. And I thank you, and I know that Priscilla, the Executive Director, and the Board of Directors, and past volunteers and current volunteers all thank you for the many contributions you've made to the Society and to the History Center over the years, and continue to make as a volunteer here, so thank you so much. You've been involved with Historical Society for a long time. How did you first hear about the Contra Costa County Historical Society?
There was an article in the newspaper in 1981, I suppose, an article about a class at Diablo Valley College. Ruth Suter was teaching the history of Contra Costa County. I thought it might be fun to attend. I met Bev Clemson, who was the director of Walnut Creek Shadelands, Andrew Young, who had just published his book, The Improvers of Lafayette, George Emanuels, who knew all about the history of Contra Costa County, George Collier, who came from West County, Margaret Plummer. Peg Plummer was the granddaughter of John Sweat, the father of education of Contra Costa County. I would go home, my mother lived with us, Amelia Ginocchio Peel at that time, and tell her about all the people I met.
And did you meet all these people in the class?
Yes, they came to be speakers.
Okay.
I would go home and tell Mom, and she would say, you know, at dinner one night, she said, I don't know why you don't belong to the Contra Costa County Historical Society. Papa's lawyer founded that thing. Now, Papa's lawyer was Judge Bray, Frank Bray. And I remember we looked it up in the telephone book, a telephone book which we don't use anymore. We found the Bray residence in Martinez, and I called and talked to Lila Bray. She sent us an application, and we joined the Historical Society.
And so about when was this that you started?
In the 80s, 1980s.
1980s?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And the meetings, where were the meetings held?
The meetings were at the Concord Inn in Concord. All of their meetings were held there. Roy Bloss would bring all of the books that they sold. We met Louis Stein. Louis Stein and Frank Bray, Justice Bray, had founded the organization. And there were speakers. We met Mary Ellen Jones, who was an archivist at Bancroft Library. Roy Bloss, who was a member, later became a president. I believe he was president when we joined. I was invited to be on the nominating committee.
To nominate people to serve on the board?
Peg Plummer was on the board. And when I went to the meetings were held at the water company in Concord. And I went to the meeting. My husband asked when I left what office I was going to have, and I said, oh, I don't have to worry about becoming an officer. I'm on the nominating committee. And when I arrived, Peg Plummer had sent a notice and said, I'm sorry, I can't come to meetings anymore. It's too difficult. I nominate Betty Maffei, and I became a member of the board. We had only belonged for less than a year.
Wow. It's moving along quite quickly there.
Yes, yes, suddenly.
And how long, do you remember how long you served on the board?
I served on the board until I asked them to accept my resignation and hire me as the director.
As the executive
Yes.
director. Right, right. And so that executive director was at the start of the History Center at that time?
No, there was no History Center. In the very beginning, there was the Development Association. The Development Association was founded to do just that, develop Contra Costa County. It's now called the Contra Costa Council. The Board of Supervisors gave it a stipend. Once a year, I believe they received over $1,000. And Justice Bray and Louis Stein were past presidents of the Development Association, and they formed the Contra Costa County Historical Society. In the early minutes, I noticed that they planned a history center, proposed that somehow there would be a museum. They began to apply and talk to the Board of Supervisors. When I came on the board, Roy Bloss, Andrew Young, and several of the other members had had meetings with the Board of Supervisors asking for a place to move Louis' collection. Louis was a collector and had wanted to be a historian. Evidently, when it was time for him to go to college, he told his father that he wanted to be a historian, and his father said, "No, there's no money in history."
So what did Louis do as a profession?
Louis became a pharmacist. So the pharmacist who lived in Kensington and started the Arlington Pharmacy, and the justice who had been a lawyer, Papa's lawyer, my grandfather's lawyer, founded the Contra Costa County Historical Society in 1951.
And when you say your Papa's lawyer, you're talking about
My
Giovanni
mother,
Ginocchio?
yes, my mother always talked about Papa's lawyer. Papa's lawyer was Justice Bray, who had originally been a lawyer. When the Contra Costa County Historical Society held an octogenarian tea at Rossmore, somewhere in the 80s, after we'd had a history center, they lined up all of the people who had been interviewed, and Amelia, my mother, had been interviewed. Justice Bray was there. Wakefield Taylor, another judge, used to drive him. And we placed our two friends in the middle of the room, all of these people who were honored on that day. And when all of the introductions were over and we went to help, because at that time my mother was over 90, Justice Bray was 93, and my mother said in her very famous loud whisper, "Betty Jane, who is that old geezer sitting next to me?" And I said, "Mom, that's Justice Bray, you know, Papa's lawyer." And she turned around and stared at him. Now Wake heard all this, and we discussed it and laughed a lot about it later. And she looked at him and said, "Betty Jane, how did he become so old?" They were 2 years apart.
Huh. Yeah, that's something. So you became executive director. Was this before the start of the History Center?
No, Andrew Young was the first director.
Of the society before there was,
There was only the meetings and discussions with the Board of Supervisor, and suddenly the building at 1700 Oak Park Boulevard belonged to the county.
Oak Park Boulevard in Pleasant Hill.
In Pleasant Hill, and we were given, the Contra Costa County Historical Society was given one schoolroom, and in 1984 the Louis and Mildred Stein collection was moved from Kensington, from his Louis home, to the Lowy Museum in UC Berkeley so it could be fumigated, and then it was brought to the one-room schoolhouse, and the History Center was opened.
And it must have been quite an undertaking, because didn't Louis have quite the collection?
Louis' collection was labeled one section A, one section B, and another section C. And I jokingly called it A for the attic, because they had a huge attic, and B for the basement, because I discovered when I went to his home that there were quite a few things in the basement. And later, when the photographs were moved to us, lo and behold, they were in C, the closet. So A, B, and C. It took a while.
So that was his filing system, but obviously that worked for him.
That was his filing system. He labeled everything Walnut Creek, labeled by towns. And when they had meetings, when they used to have meetings, and they had meetings quarterly, Louis was always the speaker, and he would bring things from his attic to show. So if it was about Orinda, he would bring all of his things that he'd collect in Orinda. He had quite a huge collection of Walnut Creek. It took me a while to figure out. In 1915, his father, his parents were immigrants from Germany, and they came after the war, after World War I. And by 1915 or 17, Louis's father owned most of Vine Street. He was a butcher. He owned most of Vine Street in Berkeley. And he bought a ranch in what is now Lafayette, where Akalani's high school is. So most of Louis's story was that in the summertime, he and his brother had to come and work with Papa on the ranch. His sister stayed home and did all the women things, as Louis would say, at home. And so Louis's neighbors were all Walnut Creek, the people who founded Rossmar, the people who, we had many, many huge collections of Walnut Creek. And when I asked him why, he said, I was always there. I lived in Walnut Creek.
He certainly had a tremendous interest in Contra Costa County history.
He knew so much about Contra Costa County, and he lived in Berkeley.
Yes.
However, when I would go down to his home, and on one occasion we took him to lunch, and driving with Louis was like driving with my mother in the car. He'd point out the window, oh, old lady so-and-so lived over there, and there's the bridge they put in 1917, and it was like being with a travel guide.
Yes. He had a lot to share.
And he shared often. Louis was a very interesting gentleman. The collection arrived, and I would call and ask him questions about it, and he invited me to come, and he said he had some more boxes for me. So Beverly Clemson, who was working at the History Center at the time, and I went down, and he had quite a few boxes that we could take, and I began piling things up. Now this is the attic, and when you have a two-story...
The A boxes, huh?
Well, when you have a two-story house, you don't make a trip every time you want to go upstairs or downstairs. You put things by the top of the stairs or at the bottom, and you take them when you go up. And Louis did the same thing, and he said, just put them by the door, put them by the steps, and when you go down, you take them all at once. Well, I'm sorry, but most of the time I had to go up and down the stairs all the time, because Louis would walk over to the pile by the top of the stairs and say, oh, I think I'm still working on this, and he'd take it back and put it back in the file cabinet. There was a book that I was so delighted that he was giving to the History Center. Picked it up and said, no, I think I still want this, and he put it back on his shelf. So in order to have him out of his sight, I would take him downstairs and put them in my car, and then go back up the stairs.
Oh, okay.
Needless to say, my trips to Louis were weight loss.
Yes, you got your share of exercise.
Very tired. And about 4 o'clock, he'd say, well, it's time for a drinky poo. We have to have a cocktail now. He didn't want to work anymore, and so we'd go downstairs, and he'd get a box of crackers and a bottle of wine, and we'd sit down at the table and listen to Louis' stories and make notes as to what we would take the next time we went to visit him.
So just you and Beverly Clemson then at the beginning making those trips
At the beginning, and then I asked if anybody had had a problem with the first collection, and they said yes, he would come out to the History Center. Andy kept it open on Mondays and Fridays, but later we discovered Andy didn't open the door. Andy kept the door closed and filed. And Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I opened it with the volunteers. Mm-hmm. And Louis would come out, wander through and say, I didn't mean to give this to you, I need to take it home. People are still calling me, and so he would take things home.
So
and
you
then,
take them back.
Then I'd take them back.
So from Louis' home in Kensington, you loaded them. Did they then go to UC Berkeley for fumigation?
No, not after the first time.
Not after the first time.